Humanity Rising and the 289th live broadcast of this truly catalyst for change platform and all of its dialogues. Now, my name is Sabinia von Gafke, and I'm hosting today's session as our dear Jim Garrison, who hosts these sessions each and every day, is at a retreat, a Joe Dispenza retreat that I'm sure that he will come back and convey a lot of knowledge and wisdom from. And I've also had the pleasure to co-convene these sessions with Jim a few times before since the start in May of 2020. And I just want to mention again, which I've mentioned before, that I'm truly blown away with the way Humanity Rising truly is rising both as a platform and as a movement, together with all the speakers that have guested us and the speakers that will guest us, all the viewers that are with us each and every day or sporadically, all the partners and organizations that come together, and all the fruits of fruition that have brought companies, organizations, and individuals together to form new impactful ventures that truly are navigating the way forward for a greener, more sustainable, regenerative planet and humanity. And that is really, really, truly applaudable, because this is such a beautiful example of what can happen when a conversation ignites and sparks a dialogue, and then sparks an action. And that action also enables collaboration and co-creation, once again, on the foundation that we all really are integrated. And with this pandemic that we've had now since 2020, there truly are two ways of looking at it. One, of course, looking at it that this is something that has come upon us, or another way that this is something that can actually awaken us to really see that we can be seeds of collaborative nodes of networks who can come together and really catapult change for the better, and pave the way for the world that we want to live in. And each and every conversation that we've had in these 289 sessions have been truly foundational and interesting and revigorating, and also really opening up for new collaborations. And so will today's conversation, that is a conversation together with Mac Macartney, who is a writer, a speaker, an activist, and he's also the founder of Embercombe in Devon. And it's a center that seeks to inspire and empower people to live in close relationship with nature and to co-create a regenerative, flourishing future for all species. So really in resonance with what Humanity Rising and all the conversations hope to achieve. Now, Mac and his wisdom and insights of life are truly interesting, because they devour from ancient history of his ancestors. And this came after 20 years of being mentored by indigenous elders, where he truly has paved the path of the saying that we need, in order to create the future, we really need to know our past. And it's going to be truly interesting to have a conversation with Mac and learn about how he has gone about his journey, which is very inspiring, because it's both a journey by foot, but it's also a journey through life and coming back to the past and taking that on in the future. And Mac is an author of a recently published new book called The Children's Fire, A Heart Song of a People. And he has also delivered 4 compelling TEDx talks that I encourage you to listen to, should this topic feel of interest. Now, before I welcome Mac Macartney for a conversation, I want to invite us all, that all of you who have been part of Humanity Rising know that we have as a tradition, and that is a 1-minute heart coherent meditation, just to align ourselves to be here and now, and to open our hearts and minds to be receptive for the conversation that we're going to have for about 1.5 hours going forward. And I also encourage, I know we have a lot of active viewers in our Zoom chat, so please do send in questions during this conversation that I'm sure will be a truly rewarding one. So with that, let us close our eyes, take a few breaths, and just feel the presence of all of us tuning into today's session. with gratitude. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate in that heart-centered, coherent meditation. And with that, I want to give a warm welcome to today's guest, Mac Macartney. Are you with us?
I am.
Oh,
hello, Miss Sabinia.
Hello, Max. So lovely to have you with us. And I wanted to open the conversation also for people to get the opportunity to get to know more about you and then sort of dive more into all the different aspects of your life. But tell us, I mean, start from the beginning of telling us sort of the origins of the life that you have led and some of the beginnings of why you actually took the steps to dive into your past in order to navigate your future.
Sure, thank you. I realize it sounds ancient to many people, which in itself, which it probably is, but I was born in 1949. And, you know, my parents, I was very fortunate, but their understanding really of how our three boys needed to be raised was to invite us to occupy the outdoors and spend as much time as possible out there, and we did. And you know, we would disappear from the home after breakfast, rushing out the door, and my mother wouldn't expect to see us back until the early evening, and she would have no idea where we'd gone or what we were doing. All she knew is that we went fully armed with knives and bows and arrows and whatever it was that we gathered about ourselves and the dog, and we headed off to the closest wild place we could find. And when I think about it now, I mean, there were broken bones and there were sort of visits to hospital and there were all sorts of these other things, but my overall feeling for it was a time of absolute joy and freedom, of being deeply immersed in nature. And I do look back now and feel that, you know, I was touched on the shoulder, or perhaps more accurately, I was touched in the heart by our Mother Earth. The smell of the seasons. We were out, whatever the weather, sheeting, rain, snow, wind, sun, whatever it was, we loved it. The climbing of trees, every tree that we could find was a new challenge, and in the so doing, all of the development really of the love of the trees and the streams and the hills and the woods that I occupied. And when I think about it now, I realized how blessed I was by this experience, because it entered me very deeply. My parents also were, you know, again, unusual really for the generation, but I remember my mother teaching me when I was very little, maybe 5, 6 years old, how to make a little house for the fairies and to make a tiny little bed with thistledown as a mattress and a tiny little chair and a tiny little door. And then we would leave some food in there. And the following morning I'd come down and of course the food wasn't there. And there was perhaps a coin, like the old-fashioned English sixpence or something. And these sort of things I think I entered the imaginal in that way. And that seed, because I do think of it as a seed, was lodged really deep inside me. And when later I was obliged, as it were, to enter a different kinds of worlds, which I could speak about maybe later, but when that happened, thank goodness that seed remained intact and would later germinate and provide me really with a way through to the kind of adult life that I really wished to inhabit.
Wow. And sort of looking into entering different kind of worlds. And also, like I mentioned, I mean, you had 20 years of mentorship with indigenous people. I mean, that's a vast period of time. But if you would sort of come or distill that down to what kinds of pairs of wisdom and insights, and also facilitation and navigation, did this instill in you that you in your turn now convey as a speaker and navigator and facilitator to others? What are sort of the wisdom-filled insights that you find are maybe very crucial today, looking at the world today?
Well, you know, the first thing they said to me, Sabinia, when I first met them, they asked me if I wanted to die. They said, "You seem so full of sadness. We see grief spilling out from you all over. Everything that you love is being crushed and broken and destroyed. And you appear to have somehow only feel the pain of all this. So you're so full of sadness that if you don't change that, then we think it'll kill you. Sadness kills. So Mac, do you want to die? If you want to die, we'll start the ceremony now, because we have a ceremony to help people die. You know, we'll start the drums, we'll begin the ceremony. Do you want to die? You see, the thing is that if you want to live, then we need you to fully show up, fully arrive. And you have to walk your way out of that sadness, because the earth is calling you and calling all people who love what is beautiful in this world to find that, we could say, warrior within them, and decide that irrespective of which way the wind is blowing, irrespective of how appalling many of the things that are happening around our world, that nothing will change until people begin to gather and sing a rather different song and stand for different things. So the first one for me was that. And but they added to that, they said, but if your choice is to live, then you need to understand that we're going to challenge you in a big way. And you're likely to spend quite a lot of time crying and upset and all the rest of it. So you need to be careful about how you answer now. But what they discovered, Sabinia, is they saw straight to the very heart of me. They saw that seed that had been lodged inside me such a long time ago. And they called it forward. And they said, all through your young life, you knew what you loved, and you were in service to it, because she revealed herself to you in some way. But now you've been persuaded that you have to somehow shut the door on all that. But you see, you've got that wrong. You need to open the door on all those things. And they added to this, it doesn't matter how many ceremonies you do with us, how many times we do all these different kinds of ceremonies. In the end, we're really sorry, but you're going to have to face the fact that you're a Brit. And these ceremonies are not yours. And that you can never be what we are. You can only be yourself. And that is a wonderful thing. So the best we can do for you is to open the door to your own indigenous past. And then you have to walk through it and follow those trails. And, you know, for me, that was one of the most magical, wonderful, challenging, exciting invitations I ever received. And I did participate in many of their ceremonies, and they were wonderful. But in the back of my mind, I always knew this was simply preparing me for what was to come later.
Mm. And it seems that one can really draw a parallel to, I mean, the advice that you were given, the journey that you've gone through, and also looking at where we are today from an individual to the level of humanity, that this, you know, do we want to live or die, in a sense, is a question that is arising now, whether in what context we put it, but this sort of fully showing up, the awakening, the consciousness. Do you find when you interact or speak or mentor people yourself today, is that a knowledge that people are willing to acquire or have a curiosity for, to really, you know, level up and show up in a time where many feel that, you know, we're in such crisis that is there even a meaning to it? Whereas others are more stepping into their warriors and really trying to pave that path.
Yeah, well, truthfully, of course, some are willing and some are interested and others are not. Mm. And all of them mostly are very decent and lovely human beings, you know. But some have somehow given up. I have to say that many my generation have given up. By no means all, but many have. When I met with the Tuhoi tribe of the Maori people a few years back, we was in discussion, and I asked them if they, you know, if they had the concept of retirement within their culture, and they laughed. And, you know, they were laughing, and they said, "You know, Mac, yes, we do have that concept. We retire our young people between the ages of about 17 and 26, 27 or something, because they're so, you know, they've just got to go and do what they need to do. You know, they're our young people, they just go crazy. We just say to them, look, go off and do what you have to do, because you're young and life is just pouring out of you in every pore of your body, as it were. But when you come back, then you're in service to your people. And every decade that follows, the bar rises and we expect more of you. So when you become 50, we expect a lot. When you become 60, we demand that you give us everything. When you're 70, we expect you to be surfing. And when you're 80, as it were, you're in the fullness of your being, and so on. And I just love that. The truth is, it would seem in our society, we've pushed our older people out to the periphery. But worse than that, they've colluded with it. They've sort of gone meekly, and it doesn't work. How can you take, you know, lifetimes of experience? But many also expect somehow respect or expect to be listened to, when actually all they're giving is received wisdom, which they've never challenged themselves. Or you know what I mean? They're not still alive, really alive and learning and curious, and maybe a little too interested in handing out advice rather than asking questions. So yes, many, on the other hand, I would say also, in much of my speaking, particularly around festivals and, you know, festival music events and things, when there are often a lot of young people, there is a tremendous resonance with the message, because it flies in the face of the idea that this story is almost done, that we have so harmed and damaged our planet that there is almost no recovery. And my position on that is, I have no idea. I do not have the means to assess whether we've already tipped over this cliff edge, or whether we are walking towards it still, or wherever we are. But I'm not even particularly interested, because I think it's unanswerable at the moment. What I would choose to say is that while I have breath in my body, I have the ability to decide how I'd like this life to be lived. And I wish it to be lived in service to the well-being of all species, if you like, and those that are born and the unborn. Because I can't think of anything else that I'd rather do in this life than be able to stand at the end of my chapter, as it were, and look back and have some sense that I stood for all those things I loved, and that I didn't betray them by pretending that I didn't love them.
Beautifully put. And I so agree with what I sometimes see as this more circular, nutritious mindset that we should have, where we, because as you say, this sort of ageism that our society has somehow inherited and keeps on inheriting all the time, where it's sort of this fountain of youth is the peak, and then the elderly, that's when you're sort of pushed out of society, and it's not only mind-blowing in a sense that it's unnecessary and a tragic way to look at it, but it's also so unresourceful, because we all accumulate wealth and knowledge and insight and even joie de vivre the more we mature in life. So the fusion of youth and the fusion of elderly wisdom is how we reconnect, in a sense, and how we also are a part of life's circular motion, in a sense. So I really applaud that you bring that to the surface, because I think it's a topic that we also need to bring up much more than what we're doing, which of course, if we're just looking to the future, we're distracted in the present, and we disregard the past. It's very difficult to know what kind of future we want. But I also wanted to sort of tap into your journey and also to raise the notion of, are we allowed for mistakes and failures? Because there's also some kind of anecdote to that mistake and failures should not be part of a journey, because we're always thriving. But how have your mistake and failures been catalysts, let's say, in your journey?
They've been enormously important. I have to admit that I rather hope they'll be less important from now on, because I wouldn't, some of them were extremely painful. But I'm just trying to think now. I guess one of the things that those indigenous people did with me was they called me out. I'll give you one example. Early in my time of learning from them, I came back to England, and I managed to persuade a local landowner to give us a 3-acre field, a small field. It was beautiful enough. It was grass from fence to fence, and it had barbed wire around it, but it had some trees close by. And when I was visiting them, they asked me about my land in Britain. And I began answering in this manner, which I am so deeply embarrassed about now, but I spoke about my land in Britain, in constant referring it as to how much less beautiful it was than their land and the land that I was visiting them on. I endlessly made this comparison, demeaning my own land, if you like, in relation to theirs. And I expect in some rather weak-minded, infantile sort of behavior to try and capture their goodwill, as it were, to appease or please them. But it had the opposite effect. As I was speaking, I began to sense a feeling of hostility in the room, of extreme displeasure, until finally it was almost like soup, and one of them just exploded at me, just, how dare you, he said, how dare you speak of your land in this way? Our Mother Earth, in her wisdom, which frankly I don't understand, has seen fit to give you, you little, and then a whole spout of expletives, to give you a little piece of her garden, and you speak of it in this way. With every word, as it were, you slap her around the face, you demean and you embarrass us. And for the week following, I was never let go of. I was hounded, really, because they were saying, you know, really, do not ever do this again, you know, because it is the most appallingly shameful thing to do. You know, if you ask someone where they were born and they talk about some urban area that maybe is covered in sort of buildings that have been vacated and there's garbage all over the place and the whole place is polluted in different ways and everything, they say that is still no reason. Because who did that? That wasn't how that piece of land used to be. If I take London, London is a river valley. And that river valley carried salmon and thousands of living beings up and down it forever. It is human beings that have made it what it is now. And some of it is still beautiful and some of it is not. But our cities, of course, could and should, I would say, one day be truly beautiful places, flourishing biospheres, if you like, wonderful places, and everything. So that was one example anyway. And, you know, I have to say to my discredit that I believe that I learned a lot from that time, and I've certainly tried never to do it again.
And I wanted to tap into, I mean, you're referring to the group of indigenous elders that have mentored you for 20 years, and I'm going to take some questions from the audience, but just to bring it back to that, how did you come in contact with them initially? And how was that mentoring process initiated?
Yeah, well, in the late 70s, very early 80s, a group of friends and I, we were living in North Wales on the west of Britain, in the mountains called Snowdonia. And we heard rumors of a group of Native Americans, First Nations people traveling through Britain, visiting our ancient sacred sites. Something about this just blew us away. We were so excited. So we tried to find them. And of course, we're talking pre-internet days. So, you know, it's phone calls to different places, writing letters. It was doing all this sort of thing. And towards the end of the summer, we heard they'd gone. And I was devastated. I thought we'd missed an opportunity of a lifetime. Why were they visiting our places? Who were they? Why were they there? The second spring, we heard they were back. And now we began to sort of devise a kind of military operation to try and hunt them down and find them. And we crisscrossed the UK. And at the end of the summer, we heard they'd gone and we hadn't found them. The third spring came round. We heard they were back. And we threw everything we had at it. And finally, we met them. By this time, I just reached a point where I almost had no questions. The only question I had was, will you teach me everything that, as it were, will you teach me all that I was never taught and the only thing that I'm really interested in? And their answer was, truthfully, we don't know, because we don't know who you are. And we're going to have to get to know you. And then we will make an investment choice, really, a decision. Is it worth putting that much effort into you? What will you do with it? But meantime, you can come and join us in a ceremony happening in Scotland at this healer guy called Bruce McManaway's place. And let's see how that goes. So I contacted Bruce McManaway and said, you know, there's this ceremony, these guys, can myself and my friends come? And they said, no, we're really sorry, it's full. I said, no, you don't understand, we have to come. We've been looking for these people for 3 years, we have to come. And they said, no, you don't understand, Mac, we're full, so sorry. So I said, okay, we put the phone down and we just drove up to Scotland and arrived and beat on their door and said, we're here. And then finally, they just had to accept us because we weren't going to go away. And it was during that ceremony that I just felt I'd come home, really. Or at least it was the first sense that I was really beginning a journey of coming home. And there was no way I was going to let go of it. So that began that association. You know, and there were many, many other then challenges and tests placed in my way. By this time, our group of about 6 had whittled down to 2. But that was the beginning of it. And I still, by the way, never learnt why they were in Britain visiting our sacred sites until about, which was now about 20 years ago. And then I found out, which I can share with you if you like.
Please do, yes.
Well, they had some dreams requesting that a new stone circle be built in Britain. And that stone circle would be a prayer to the people of these islands to wake up to who they once were as a people and stand in service to our Mother Earth. And to do this, they needed to go to Britain and find a stone circle, which in their understanding still resonated with the original ceremonies that had created that stone circle in the beginning, sometime in the Bronze Age, probably. So each year they were traveling, visiting different sacred sites and stone circles, doing their ceremony, trying to find this place. And eventually they found this stone circle in Southern Ireland. And there they made the ceremony. And there they received permission to build the circle. So the next thing was where. So when they met me, and when they found out that I had been given this land in Britain, not the 3 acres I was speaking about, but 50 acres of some of Devon's most beautiful land, they tuned in and then came to me later and said, we believe that the site of the stone circle is to be at Embercombe in Devon in Britain. And that is where it is now. It was built in 1999.
Wow. Mm. And there it is. I mean, there's so many, when you hear of someone like yourself conveying both the wisdom from the past, but how it's also transitioned into our now, it's amazing how much richness we have when it comes to wisdom and insights. And I mean, from the indigenous elders to us today, have we sort of missed the notion on how to continue to cultivate this wisdom? I mean, somehow there's, I don't know if it's if you can call it a glitch or lacking, but there's somehow not that strong urge in that anymore, or maybe we haven't cultivated it as much. What's your?
Well, you know, I don't know how you were educated, Sabinia, you know, when you were young and little, rather, you're still young, but let's say little, or when many of the viewers were. But I don't think our education, you see, encourages us to do this. It does, in truth, you know, our universities should encourage us to question. But many universities are more business enterprises than they ever were anything to do with education. Our schools, at least here in Britain, are designed to shift people through various states so that they are ready to be fed to the economy and take up roles that have nothing to do with becoming a whole human being. You know, the whole process is so controlled and boundaried, and it doesn't, you know, I mean, just imagine, you know, I often have imagined, how would it be if our education system, a basic premise was, no child will leave this school without feeling good about who they are. You know, just that simple thing. How much crime, how much violence, how much sort of pain and loss and grief would we, as it were, avoid if all our young people were emerging from that period of life really knowing their value, feeling respected and held, and also knowing, which was another concept given, that every single person has a tiny piece of creation's genius lodged inside them. And the challenge from creation, I think, is to locate that little bit of genius, to grow it, to cultivate it, to bring it to fruition, and then most importantly, to share it. And that becomes, of course, your work. So, you know, yeah, I'm just...
What a beautiful way to convey that. And it's so true. I mean, there's so much wisdom in just that. And I know during Humanity Rising, you know, we've talked a lot about how do we, you know, reinvent the educational system? How do we reintegrate it? Because as you say, it's not education per se. It's not teaching us how to be human. It's actually, you know, more on an industrial level where everybody, it's on competition, and we sort of, we don't that's why we don't really understand or are able to align or resonate with the values of our own values, or understand how to share it or anything else, until we start to do maybe a soulful journey, or like you have mentorship and so forth. And hopefully we're at a time and space where this now comes a bit more to the surface, because the people who are doing a lot of this work are really finding a coherent space much more due to the pandemic. So hopefully that is also what this sort of reset or recalibration of humanity is also about.
Yes.
I thought I would take also, because we have so many positive comments and in the Zoom chat, not least, and I have a few questions here for some of our viewers. So I thought I would at least bring one, and one, you mentioned the indigenous elders, but Jane, who is one of the viewers, is this a specific group of indigenous elders, if someone is more curious of who they are?
Well, I mean, it was a specific group. It no longer exists. You'll be familiar, anybody will be familiar, I believe, who is walking or inquiring about spiritual questions, making a journey in that way, of this rather, well, I'm not sure about bewildering, but anyway, certainly saddening story of people becoming, if you like, corrupted by power, by their own influence. I think we see it with spiritual leaders all over the place, just as we see it with corporate leaders, and we see it with political leaders, we see it with people all over. We even see it in our stories, like in Lord of the Rings, you know, when what's his name, Saruman, as it were, who was once upon a time apparently, you know, a decent wizard, as it were, as he accumulates more and more power, is tempted to use it in ways which are, you know, directly opposed to, if you like, to the starting beliefs. Well, this group that I was with were led by two very, very, very powerful and profoundly insightful people, medicine people, and I have to say now that I've probably never met anyone in my life quite as able as healers and many other things than the main guy who was leading it. And later in my time with them, there were disturbing signs. And later I discovered that all was not as it appeared to be. And this rather profoundly challenging truth, I think, that the most extraordinary gifts to do with that are amazingly helpful in assisting people to develop their consciousness and to find ways of becoming more truly who they are, that those gifts can sit alongside others where, if you like, those same teachers, as it were, deep down betray the trust that they've been given. And whether it's sex or money or whatever it happens to be, then that's the deal. And that's what happened in my case here. So we had a situation in Embercombe, it is now about 18 years ago, when this was all fully revealed and discovered. And there were people who are saying, let's dismantle the stone circle. Let's take a sledgehammer to those stones. So hurt were people. And at that time, and I really reflected about it, but I said, those stones never were somebody else's. They are ours. And this thing that's happened is simply a challenge to us, because we were taught by, let's say, a number of people, but the two main teachers, we were taught by people who couldn't live that which they taught. So why don't we try and pick up the challenge and actually live what we were taught? And through that action, we'll clean these stones, as it were. We'll clean the whole thing, because we are nothing if we're not trustworthy. And that's what we've tried to do. So this is another reason why I don't give away the names of these people. And because the last thing I ever want on this earth is that they should actually try and find them. And also why I believe that, all true leadership is measured by the degree to which it truthfully seeks to empower people rather than enslave them. And when we get down to it, I'm sad to say that an enormous number of all kinds of different leaders, if you like, actually the purpose is enslavement. It's certainly not empowerment.
First of all, thank you for sharing that, Mac. And once again, it's interesting how this also, is an unveiling of how our society works and is structured. If we really look at it, that intensity of power, of how it so easily can become corrupt or corruptive or enslaving. And it's also, looking back when we talk about education, it nearly starts at the fundament of when we enter this world where we enter into scarcity and debt in a sense, and where control and it's about, and it's sort of so ingrained in society that it's nearly, that there's a sense of entitlement when it comes to power. And somehow it's so saddened to hear that this also becomes, regardless of in which situation or which sector, that it's as if the human trait sometimes is we're very good at giving advices, but we're not always, as coherent to actually take that advice and put it into action. So how do you find or contemplate how we can start to address or make power more coherent, or, is it sort of so ingrained in society that it's difficult to actually, break it apart, or is this just a human trait that too much power? And what do you find with your wisdom? What can we do to unpack this? And because it really starts, the essence of a lot starts here, I think.
Yes, one of the things that said to me was that the great gift that was given human beings was the gift of choice. it's not the same as my little cat who I used to have, whose every day was about one single thing, and that was catching mice. So she'd set forth every morning and hunt as many mice as she could. I never once found her sat on our doorstep with her head in her paws, considering the morality of killing mice. It's like she's cat. That's what she does. But our situation is different. We have the capacity to weigh these things. And I'm not particularly interested in what is right and what is wrong, as it were, because we will have different opinions about things. But I am interested, as it were, in whether or not I sit in consideration of things and weigh things, and am open enough to receive different opinions and different points of view to then make some kind of choice. Now, here in Britain, let's say, we are dominated, I would say, we are massively influenced by the media and by our tabloid, media outlets, as it were. They don't ask you what to think, they tell you what to think, okay? And you identify yourself by which media outlet you associate yourself with. I mean, even all the organizations we know, they keep feeding you the news that supports the views you already have. The effort that's absent often is, how do I get to appreciate and understand this other point of view? Am I able to sit there and consider it without just getting angry and rejecting it? Do I have to, so does there have to be a them and us, so that I can hate the others in order to feel good about myself and my other friends, as it were? Profound. I do believe that we are, it would seem, in the way that we are raised in the culture of the society we have, fundamentally insecure. And so we are victims all the time of our own fear, and therefore make constructs within the way we live based around that fear. But if we began to, a whole number of different things, which so many indigenous peoples, one of them, for instance, is how the balance between masculine and feminine, let's say. In many of those seats, many different indigenous cultures, that question is posed because it's understood that, to give all the power in any one direction is a very unwise thing to do. That you need the input, as it were, from all parts of the circle. It also depends upon us asking the question, what is sacred? And for many indigenous people, being extremely practical people, they would say things like water, clean air, good soil, children, these things. And that's what resonated so deeply with me, because I could see that within the religion that I was once upon a time associated with, there was no love of children. The children were not present in the way that whole thing. They were sort of almost irrelevant and irritating, as it were. If we were to consider how we form governments and say that actually who we want in our governments are wise people who are who are not partisan, who can weigh and are always asking the question, how will this benefit? If we take the Iroquois Confederacy's sort of idea of 7 generations, for instance, that every decision made needs to be weighed against its impact on 7 generations into the future, we would begin to get an entirely different development of our society. And I think it's also some way back, and in many different religions and things, we lost contact with the knowledge, if you like, that all life around us, trees, grass, flowers, everything, just all other forms of life, also have a right to live on this earth. And that we need to belong to that family, not dominate it. That we have to find our place in it, that we are an extremely, as indeed all species are in their own ways, but gifted. And gifts need to be mindfully deployed. And to do that, we have to be educated in that way. And to be educated in that way, we need governing circles that are always looking to the best interests. Now, compared to where we are now, I reckon that feels like an awful long journey. But do I think that it's possible? And do I think that it's potentially attainable? I'd say yes, because in many older societies, we did achieve that. Is it likely that there will be a measure, and maybe a big measure, of suffering along the way? Then yes, it probably is. But, you know, it'll be worth it, wouldn't it?
Mm. Absolutely. And sometimes I think that there is, you talked a lot about fear, and I also think it's quite ingrained in people or humanity, this fear of change, this fear of questioning your reality, your choices, your values. And like you say, we haven't learned how to, or I'm generalizing, of course, when I say we, how to, cultivate a point of different perspectives, which is also with Humanity Rising, what we're trying to do, look at different perspectives, align with, the truth that you find is valuable. And also, like you mentioned, media. I mean, what is media today? It's quite scary to look at what, the concept of media, journalism, and social media, all of this has exploded into something different to what it was initially meant to be. And that is conveying different aspects and objectively. But do you find that, how do I put this? Do you find that there is a human component where we are driving change, or we're being driven to drive the change according to the agenda? Is media and the algorithms, and as you say, what you choose to follow is also what you will be fed when it comes to information and so forth. How do we sort of reset that?
Yeah.
What is your advice when you're on stage, talking about it?
Well, I think we are being driven. I mean, I've worked with enough of those large corporations to know that a whole lot of very clever people are devoting their lives to trying to find out how they can best manipulate our insecurities and aspirations and everything towards the purpose of their organization making money. And what's bizarre and completely extraordinary is that these are not horrible people. They're mostly just pretty much like you and me, as it were. They're just people getting on with the job, and they don't really make the step and the link. So I think we are. But I would say then there are two other things. There's one which is also the whole, like our planet Earth is, as it were, herself setting, as it were, an agenda. She's pretty much saying, continue to live this way and continue to be the self-harming species that you are, and the other harming species that you are. And in the end, we'll have to shrug you off, as it were. And in the time periods that our Earth considers, as it were, it's nothing. It's a few million years, so to speak, or a few thousand years, million years, things go on. So that's also driving something, because, as I said, I'm 72. It's more than half a century ago, I remember around the dining table with my family, talks about what we were doing to the soil, to our water, to our air. And every decade it's got worse since, especially in the last 3. So there is a great waking up taking place. but that is not so far at the level that I would say we need it to be. Yet it is happening and it's moving very fast. So that's exciting. And that's another, as it were, agenda. The third one, though, is the mystery that perhaps none of us really understand. And however we refer to it, but this extraordinary kind of, I can only call it the mystery, that seems somehow to be shifting and moving and swimming in the same mystery, if you like, whereby the same idea springs up in different parts of our world at the same time. The same mystery that means that some Aboriginal indigenous people I know, when when the hunters are out hunting and back at base, somebody starts making the fire ready for the food that will be coming back. The people like myself might think, why are they making the fire now? And they'll look a little bit confused and like they're speaking to an infant, but they'll say, because they'll be here soon. And over the horizon, about 30 minutes later, you can see the hunters, and by the time they arrive, the embers of the fire are just ready. The same mystery that takes us on these journeys, when in spite of our worst efforts, we sometimes arrive in very wonderful places, meeting extraordinary people and realizing that some kind of synchronous encounter has taken place. So I don't pretend to understand. In fact, I'm not even interested in understanding. I only wish to do what I can to flow with that mystery and perhaps in due course learn more about it.
And it truly is a journey of discovery. My spiritual mentor always says to me, remember, you're a soul having a human experience. And sometimes when you see the complexity of life, and I just, tap into that, it's like you get another observation, or someone who is in space looking down at this beautiful, globe, the world, you get another perspective. But you were also talking about fire, and I know that your latest book is titled The Children's Fire, Heart Song of a People. And I know that Matt from Humanity Rising also wrote an endorsement for the book. So if I could kindly ask you to maybe, share a bit of that endorsement, because it also conveys someone else's perspective of the amazing work that you do, and also talk a bit about the book.
Yes. Well, let me just say this to beginning. At one point in around about 2007, as I learned more and more of our tribal, who we were tribally as a people in Britain, going back to the period of history before the Roman occupation. Well, firstly, when my Native American friends asked me to name some of those old tribes, and I couldn't, not one, and they were completely aghast at the fact that I knew nothing of the origins of my people. And one of them stood up and said, the names of your ancient peoples, the Coritani, the Ordovici, the Trinovantes, the Aquini, the Siluris, the Atrebates, the Brigantes, the Dumnonii, go on and on and on. And he said, if those names sound a bit Latin, well, of course they are, because those are the names that the Roman invaders heard when they, just the same as Apache, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Sioux are not the real names, they are the names that were developed through our understanding of those names. But when he spoke those names, Coritani, Ordovici, Siluris, Trinovantes, the hair started rising on the back of my neck, and I thought, oh, it's hard to, I don't know, I find it hard to sort of convey probably the excitement of imagining who we were as a people when we used to build our homes with the doorways facing the rising sun, you know, which is what we did going back 2,000 years ago. Even when we built our houses on the east coast of Britain, and the coldest wind that blows is the wind that blows off the east and northeast, we build our doorways facing the rising sun, because that was the world we inhabited. The interior of those homes layout was remarkably similar to the layout of some of the First Nation tribes of North America in the teepees and other places. In other words, it was a world view that meant that all day-to-day activities were impregnated with a spiritual worldview. So as I learned more of this, I began to understand that the Isle of Mona, which is now called the Isle of Anglesey in the north of Wales, was once, we could say, the temple school of pre-Roman Britain. This is the place where tribespeople from what is now France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, all of Britain, Scotland, Wales, would travel. They would send those people who they were ready to be trained to the Isle of Mona for what apparently was a 20-year training, according to the records held in Ireland. And they would have traveled on foot, they would have traveled on horse and all these things. Now, when Boudica, one of our very famous Ekini tribal chieftain woman, lost her final battle against Rome, and the whole collapse of our ancient way of life began to unravel, those people would have stopped going to Mona because Mona was broken. It was finished. And I just said to myself, what if in 2009, a man in his middle late 60s was once again to walk from his birthplace to the Isle of Mona, carrying a chariot ring dated to AD 60 and Boudica's last battle, walking back through those ancient tribal lands and saying we may have been laid down, but we were not defeated. To say that we will and can remember our land as sacred again, that we can fall back in love with our children so that they too can live in the beautiful world in which I was happy enough to be born. That we could set about the whole business of unraveling our political system and almost every other system along with it to recreate something that had beauty at its heart. What if I was to make that journey all the way back to the Isle of Mona and then and understand that journey to be a ceremony? And so that's what I did. And I decided I don't want a map or I don't want a compass. I will travel by navigating using the stars and the sun. I don't want a tent because I want nothing between me and the sky. I don't want a stove because I want to cook over a little wood fire. And I want to travel in winter because it's the dreaming time. And in the winter of 2009, on around January the 1st, I set off. And it was the coldest winter that Britain had had for a long time. And everything was snow and ice. And I was freezing cold. And I was carrying acorns that I'd leached the tannins out of and made into a sort of acorn powder. I'd grown an ancient strain of wheat and harvested the wheat, ground the corn and made this wheat flour, which I took with me. I carried the tinder for every next new fire stuffed down the front of my trousers so it would stay warm and dry. And I had the most extraordinary and incredible experience. And, you know, it's too much to speak of now, but all I can say is that it's like I just walked back into the dream of who we were and who we could yet be. And I'm so glad I did it. I don't think I'll do anything quite as harsh again physically, but I will do more and more similar things because it's everything that makes me happy, basically. So Matt wrote this. I have often lamented the seeming European lack of in-touchness with indigenous traditions, but this book forcefully erases that lament. Operating from a dictate by a Native American elder to make contact with the seemingly lost indigenous soul of his own land, the author moves courageously in both theory and practice to heal the soul loss. Theoretically, he makes a strong case for the imperial conquest of Rome, having not only wiped out the ancient wisdom and cultures, but even the appreciation of these cultures. And he sees that same imperial energy operating during 2,000 years of Western history. In practice, he dares to undergo his own rite of passage by embarking on an adventurous pilgrimage on ancient trails in the depths of a severe winter to arrive at a holy place of his Celtic ancestors. The result is a magical, spiritual, political tour de force, a trumpet blast that pierces the spiritual somnolence. I can't pronounce that word. It just always gets somnolence of ages, that England is back. And it is the ancient respect for the sacredness of creation that will retire human beings' anthropocentrism and its accompanying imperialism and will awaken Europe again. Creation spirituality, indeed. I mean, you know, I was very grateful to Matt for writing that. Because you know how it is, you've written something, you send it off with a wing and a prayer, hoping that, you know, somebody will look at it. But he did. And it does speak to what I tried to write about in that book. Can I just share with you, Sabinia, one thing that I wrote down at the time. So this is what I want to speak about, why I titled it The Children's Fire, Heart Song of a People. But this is what this elder woman, Native American, said to me. She said, until the day comes that the people of your islands once again go to your rivers and mountains and forests to pray, we will always be frightened of you, for you see with dead eyes, and your madness may be all it takes to tip the scales. Mend what was broken. Rekindle the children's fire. So the children's fire is a concept that came from the people who taught me, very similar to the concept of the 7 generations. They tell the story that when chiefs, women and men from a long time ago, were asking the question, how should we govern our people? We as leaders, as chiefs. They said that they had already understood, as indeed they'd known for a long time really, that when people develop some power and are given positions of authority over others, they very often become corrupted in the way that they lead, as we spoke of earlier. They said, what can we do knowing that this is the case and happens time and time again? So they did what they always did. They went out into nature. They went out in different ceremonies, fasting, praying. And somehow somebody came back and, speaking to the other chiefs, said, every time we gather as a council of chiefs, let us light a tiny little fire in the center of our council of chiefs, women and men. And we will call this fire the children's fire. And every chief will have to make a pledge to the children's fire. No law, no decision, no action, nothing of any kind will be permitted to go out from this circle of chiefs that will harm the children, now or ever. And when they made that prayer, it wasn't just to human children, it was to the young of all kind. And they said to me that they believed that a long time ago, my ancestors probably had their version of the children's fire. And they gave it to me because occasionally I get someone from North America writing to me saying, you know, what right have you got to be, as it were, telling this story and sharing this? And I said, you know, I haven't picked it up myself. I am acting on a promise I made to these people that I would do all in my power to share it anywhere where people would listen. So it, you know, and that's how it is. And that's what I've done. And I mean, they said, but I said, but I'm unclear how I'm going to share that. And they said, well, you know, speak. I said, you've got to be joking. Speaking terrifies me. You know, every time I speak in front of an audience, I'm just, you know, it's one of the worst things I can ever imagine. They said, we don't mind. I said, oh, no, I understand you don't mind, but I mind because this could be profoundly humiliating. You know, I might just stand in front of the audience and weep. And they said, well, they'd never forget that. So we don't care, Mac. You know, cry as much as you like. Be speechless for 40 minutes, just staring at your audience. But if you are at least some way the human we think you are, then you'll do this, irrespective of whether you feel frightened or not. You'll do it because your love is greater than your fear. And write, by the way. And I said, write? I can't write. I don't know how to write. And they said, oh, it's ridiculous. Just write. And it's all the same thing. So that's what I did. And I guess that's what I'm doing.
Well, I just want to applaud that you are doing that, Mac, because it's so visible and touching, because you really do speak from the heart. There's so much authenticity, transparency, and also I can see and sense, you know, the way you're touched yourself when you tap into certain aspects of your journey, and also talking about the children's fire. And I love these conversations, and specifically when you have conversations like this with human beings like yourself, because this is what gives hope to humanity. Because it's so we're always dressing the tree somehow, you know, with media, and everybody's, you know, more looking at a prompter and conveying words. But when you hear from people who truly, you know, are in synchronicity and in resonance with what they're saying, as you are, then there is, you know, it's something that other humans can resonate with. And I can already see it, you know, just in our Zoom chat. And as someone points out here as well, Lillian, it is the power of storytelling. I mean, we can create impact through storytelling, both in print and verbally, like you're doing. And I wanted to also raise, speaking about, you also so eloquently spoke about, you know, that we all have a fire, a genius fire within us, or at least a seed of geniusness that unfortunately our society isn't really cultivating from an early age, but that we now have the opportunity to start to cultivate by hearing from, you know, role models or people of inspiration like yourself. And I had a question here from Steve in the chat, which says, what practices did you learn to locate your genius?
Well, there are three questions that I think are very helpful. This is a way of playing for time, actually, as I consider that question. But the first one is, what is it that you most deeply and profoundly love?
Mm.
This is not a question to be dealt with in in some kind of workshop or something, you know. It's an ongoing question that you bring to every decade of your life.
Mm.
When you answer that question, and the emphasis is on deeply and profoundly, you have in effect defined what is sacred to you. You know in your heart that you could never betray these things without the most awful consequences, as it were. The second question is, what are your deepest and most profound gifts? And the third question is, what are your deepest and most profound responsibilities? The gift of the question of your gifts takes you on a journey. Yet so many of us avoid the journey, or become discouraged on the journey, or believe that other people have more knowledge and insight than we do, as it were, and therefore submit to the opinions of others. I've learned that learning from other people is crucial and important, because of course they're innumerable numbers of people who have wonderful things to teach. But we should never give away, as it were, our own authority. Some indigenous friends of mine once said, kneel to me, they said, Matt, kneel only to the rose, to nothing and nobody else. Kneel only to the rose. I think when you go on the hunt of gifts, you understand the reason for going on the hunt for your gifts is to be in service to the answer of the first question of what it is you most deeply and profoundly love, because that it is towards that your gifts are given. And that means then you have to follow hunches. You have to follow intuitions. You have to follow the most ridiculous kind of aspirations that you have, even though all the information says that it's impossible. So I can give you an example. I mean, my entire school career, from when I was, whatever I was, 5 years old until I was 18 years old, I believed I was stupid. I believed I was stupid because I was 25th out of 25 in the D stream of the school. In my generation, nobody really understood about dyslexia, and they certainly didn't understand about dyscalculia, which is a sort of mathematical version of dyslexia. So when we got to parts of speech in English, because that is essentially a similar way of thinking, I couldn't do anything. When we talked about any form of maths, I couldn't do anything. When we dealt with all kinds of other things, I was not able to show who I was. The secret that I kept locked inside me and never shared anyone, because I believed that I would be so utterly humiliated by their laughter, was that I did have things to say, and that I could do so powerfully and fluently because I love them. That I really wanted to write a book because I love books, even though my English grade didn't suggest that that was anywhere near possible. We have to follow these things. We have to also accept that on any journey, we will meet all kinds of weather. If you see what I mean, you know, long periods of drought, periods when it just rains every day, grey scudded clouds, storms and blizzards and everything, including sunny spells, let's hope, and all the rest of it. But the question of what is it most deeply and profoundly love keeps joy foremost in our minds and hearts as well. And that's very important. Because if we laugh, if we smile, if we find good company, I often say to people, they say, what can I do? I've got hold of this thing, but it's so fragile. I say, keep good company, because many times our friends, the people we call our friends are not necessarily going to be the ones that are going to help you change, because they don't want you to. Our families, who maybe we love, but don't always want us to change. Lots of things don't want us to change. So it's not in rejecting these things necessarily, but in simply understanding that to be true to our own paths, we have to navigate and take the captaincy ourselves and not allow anyone else to steal that from us.
And if you would, I mean, you've conveyed so much insights and wisdom and knowledge and inspiration already. But if you would look, because the art of life is that we cultivate our insights and wisdom based on our experiences, and the more mature we get, the more we learn from our mistakes, and we learn to cultivate or open up our intuition and so forth. So what piece of advice would you give to yourself, to your younger self? Because I think that's relevant coming, for other people to find what is that advice or insight that you would give or wish that you had when you were, whether it's in your teens or small, at that moment, where you all have those pivotal moments where something shifts.
Well, Spinia, I am the age that I told you, but I also have a 4-year-old son.
Oh, congratulations.
And he's the sweetest little guy. So I am in the process of trying to give to him what I would have liked to have received myself, even though I honor my parents of the generation they were born and what they gave me, which was in itself quite unusual. To give you an example, being of the generation I am, my mother cooked the meals and my father was out at work. But I remember a day when we were all lined up, 8 years old, 9 years old, whatever. And my dad saying to us, if your mother is going to spend her day preparing the food that we all enjoy in the evening, then the very least you can do is sit her down after the meal, give her a cup of tea or whatever it is she wants, and then go back to the kitchen and clean up all the dishes and put them away and do all the rest of it. So it was unusual for that time, as it were. But I have to my left of my screen, I have a bird table where I have all kinds of different birds visiting all the time. And amongst them was a robin. And that's robins in the UK and Europe are different from, I think, robins in North America. But anyway, I have a robin with red breasts. And I was looking at this guy and thinking, I think if I made a bit of an effort, he would take food from my hand. So I began to just place it on my hand and hold it out. And sure enough, after a few weeks, he'd take food from my hand. And now he'll take it 5 to 10, 15 times a day. So I brought my little boy and I said, Kai, I think Robin wants to feed from your hand. But you have to learn how to be still, because he's got to work out whether he can trust you. And you have to sort of understand the world from his point of view or her point of view, because to be honest, I have no idea whether it's a he or a her. And so he was 3 and a lot of difficulty being still, very excited, impossible, But towards the end of his 3rd year, he managed to keep his hand still enough. And the robin came and landed on his tiny little hand and ate food. Now it lands on his hand all the time. But this is not the robin that I used to feed. It's one of the children of the robin who I used to feed. It's going down through the generations. And there's a little nest of mice underneath a plank outside in the grass. and there's a little family of mice. So we lift up the plank every now and then and drop a tiny little bit of food in there. And he's seen the babies when they were without any fur. He's seen them with fur. He's seen them get older. What the Bushmen of the Kalahari, Botswana, Kalahari, and all that area talk about this with children is building ropes of connection that link them to our earth. When my mother died, just before she died, I planted a tree for her. I asked her if she would like a tree planted after she had died. And she said, you know, I would love a tree planted for me. But knowing my middle son as I do, I'd quite like to see him plant it before I die to make sure it actually happens. So over there, on a day in her 89th year, I brought her to Embercombe. I sat her in a chair, wrapped her up in a ceremony blanket, and I dug a hole and I planted her tree. And as I planted it, I went back over our whole history, all my life, and all the times she had stood by me, all the wonderful ways in which she had somehow helped me become the human that I am. And Kai learnt how to climb trees on her tree. So for me, 2 days ago, we dug up his potato.
Oh.
He planted it a few weeks ago. Every day I say to him, how many potatoes did you plant? He says, 1, Dada, 1. I said, okay, it's 1 potato. I'd wonder if it will have grown fat or anything when we dig it up. And he's really curious. So every day he waters his potato. It's in a pot. And this weekend, we pulled the potato out and there's 25 potatoes.
Oh, wow.
He's completely blown away because he's just experienced creation. He's just experienced it, like with the little bird and the mice. From my mind, this is what we should be doing with our children. Helping them, loving them, respecting them, understanding that they have things to teach us, but that they need to feel safe, and yet they also need to experience risk and sometimes have the consequences of poor choices, because otherwise they can never know the boundaries. They'll never know what they can do, what they can't do. So I take him to work with me many times. We do all kinds of tasks, and he can recognize about 15 kinds of tree. He knows all sorts of names of different herbs, spiders, animals, creatures. And all the time we're just expanding those ropes of connection so that he can know one day that he belongs and is part of a much bigger family.
Wow. What a beautiful story and metaphor for life as well. And also really showcasing such a simple but yet profound way to create ropes of connection and to create experiences of creation to the next generation. I mean, sometimes it's in the art of simplicity where we really can make the biggest acts of generosity, of impact, of insight, of experience and everything. And I think you convey that so beautifully. And we've had a conversation now for 1.5 hours and we could continue. And I know that there are a lot in the chat who are wondering how can they connect with you, also know more about your book, The Children's Fire, look at your TEDx talks. We didn't have that much time to talk about Embercombe in Devon, which is the center there's that beautiful book, The Children's Fire, where you also read the recognition that you were given by Matt from Humanity Rising. So where can they easiest connect with you, Matt?
Sabinia, my website is macmacartney.com.
Macmacartney.com.
And Embercombe is Ember, as in the embers of a fire, EMBERCOMBE.org.
Perfect.
And yes, That would
We'll
be
put
lovely.
that in the Zoom chat.
And I'm so appreciative to you and to Jim and to the whole Humanity Rising team for inviting me to spend some time with you now. I really appreciate it. And also to all those who've been in there, because, you know, much love to them as well.
And it's been a pure pleasure for us to have you with us, Mac. And thank you for, once again, with such heartfelt, authentic, loving, caring, and also so deeply insightful way of conveying your journey, but also the wisdom and insights that really can be a torch to hand over to each and every one of us. I mean, it's truly been such a beautiful conversation, and I'm sure it is also a conversation that can ignite seeds of fruition in other people. And I mean, there are so many topics we've conveyed, but I also, you know, what you talked about leadership. Leadership is measured by how we empower people, not by how we enslave them. And also, you know, tap into your geniuses. And you had your 3 questions, you know, what do you deeply and profoundly love? What are your deepest and profound gifts? And what are your deepest and profound responsibilities? And last but not least, what you hold sacred.
Yeah.
So thank you once again very much, Mac Macartney, for joining us for Humanity Rising. Please do reach out to Mac, and thank you for all of you who have viewed us today and being part of this conversation. And do join us tomorrow for Humanity Rising. Mac, you also talked about the importance of the balance between the feminine and the masculine. And tomorrow we have a really interesting topic, because tomorrow is all about the topic of what women need from men. Truly going to be an inspiring conversation. So join us then tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time. Once again, thank you, Mac. Thank you to all of you, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.